Funding for Lawmakers comes from
the University of West Georgia in Carrollton, ensuring a better life for Georgians in the 21st century. More than 100 programs of study prepare students for successful careers in the critical professions of education and nursing, as well as business and the liberal arts. The Georgia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of Georgia's business community, over 4,000 members strong, working with lawmakers for over 90 years to make sure that our state remains a place where companies thrive.
and by supporters of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Thank you.
Coming up on Lawmakers, the Senate approves a measure that would allow a state income tax credit for a single-family home purchase, more compensation for Georgia's math and science teachers, and we talk with Tom Crawford of CapitalImpact.com about this week under the Gold Dome. Those stories and more are coming up next.
Live from Atlanta, this is Lawmakers. Here are your anchors, Nwandi Lawson and David Zelski.
Good evening, everyone. Also on tonight's broadcast, a new income eligibility verification requirement for Medicaid and Peach Care passes the House.
And Senate Appropriations Chair Jack Hill talks about challenges plugging holes in the state's 2010 budget. But first, our top story tonight, legislation that hopes to boost home sales in a stagnant real estate market. The home purchase income tax credit legislation passed the Senate today. HB 261 provides home buyers with a tax credit of 1.2% of the purchase price, or $3,600, whichever is less, with the purchase of a single-family home within 6 months of the bill being signed into law. Senator Chip Pearson, who carries the bill in the Senate, is followed by Senator Nan Orrock. She spoke out against the legislation, saying this kind of tax credit will dig an even deeper revenue hole for the state.
House Bill 261 addresses this issue by giving a limited one-time tax credit on your income tax, state income tax, for the purchase of a home in a short period of time between the effective date, the month preceding the effective date, which would be the signature of the governor, or after the 40 days pass if he doesn't sign, and 6 months later. So it's a true stimulus in that they have to act now. They have to act now. This will not be available next year. It won't be available the year after. The bill also takes into account the fact that we wouldn't necessarily want a huge hit at one time, and it spreads out the up to $3,600 tax over 3 budget years.
When we're looking at balancing the budget with cuts of $1.5 billion to our state agencies, how can we then argue that we pass this bill which adds another $166 million to our shortfall? How can we make that case? In this budget year alone, it's $110 million. Folks, we're digging the hole deeper.
HB 261 passed with only 4 dissenting votes. However, there were Senate changes, so it now goes back to the House. Well, another one of Governor Perdue's initiatives passed the Senate today. HB 280 aims to address the state's shortage in math and science teachers. This measure moves a teacher certified in math or science up in salary equal to 6 years of credible service. Senate Education and Youth Chairman Dan Weber explains.
For 6th through 12th grade, it would be a recruiting tool for our school systems. School teachers, math and science school teachers who are hired in their first year would be bumped up the state salary schedule to a level 4. Any teachers existing teachers between level 1 and level 4 would also be bumped up, so there's no leapfrogging. In the elementary grades, K through 5, if a teacher goes through a process of getting an endorsement for either math or science, they would get a $1,000 stipend as incentive to do that.
And the bill does include certain performance criteria that these teachers would have to meet in order to receive this raise. HB 280 passed 50-0, receiving no changes in the Senate, so it now goes to the governor's desk where it originated.
The House voted today to allow the Department of Community Health to verify income with the Department of Revenue for Medicaid and Peach Care applications. Representative Michelle Henson asked Representative Mickey Chanel how this would impact those who recently lost high-paying jobs.
That would be addressed in the appeals process. There's in place an appeals process now. If someone is turned down for Medicaid, the department would send them a letter and give them 30 days. And that's where the existing process would come into play. For example, pay stubs. Let's say somebody's made $75,000 last year, but is either now out of a job or in a much lower paying job. What would be available would be their income tax return from last year showing they had a higher income. And that when that came back saying that, they would have the right to appeal that and show the people who are doing it that they now have a lower income.
SB 165 passed 157-7. Because that bill was amended by the House, it now returns to the Senate. The House also passed stream buffer legislation. Representative Ellie Dobbs questioned Representative Mike Cohn about why the state is creating a definition for ephemeral stream.
Rules and regs can be changed on a whim, but this has to be changed by us, which takes some time, but we can do it. As you know, we can change the law every year.
But several representatives, including Brian Thomas and Debbie Buckner, did not agree that the designation of ephemeral streams needs to move from Department of Natural Resources regulations into state law.
You look around at our neighboring states, they do not define ephemeral stream in law. They define it in rules or regulations. Now, why do they do that? Well, because they don't want to chisel into law an inadequate definition that does not actually clarify things, that doesn't provide a meaningful understanding of what something is.
Why, when we have the thousands of people trained across the state of Georgia to follow this definition that says only in direct response to precipitation with runoff? Why don't we use the definition that we already have? Why are we creating ambiguity? Why are we creating an opportunity for cities and counties to have to make decisions and referee?
A committee substitute to SB 155 passed by a vote of 106-50. That measure now heads back to the Senate.
It's no secret that Georgia's revenue picture is bleak, and cuts to the 2010 budget are quite drastic. Even with over $1 billion in stimulus funds, Senate Appropriations Chairman Jack Hill took the well this morning to explain why they're being conservative with using the state's reserve funds, and also why they're looking forward a year or two when it comes to making these tough decisions.
We're virtually using over half of the stimulus funds in 10 plus 9. In 11, which is next year, which is the sobering year I want to kind of leave with you as a message this morning, as you can see that cuts to agencies represent some $2.2 billion, and there is the rest, the green is the rest of your stimulus funds that we will have. And after that, there is no more. That's the end of those stimulus funds. As you can tell, in 2011, we have no reserves left. We've used up every state health benefit plan reserve. We've used up every pot that we've got. We're basically down to stimulus funds and cuts to the budget. That's all that's left in 2011.
And the Senate Appropriations Committee is expected to approve its version of the 2010 budget on Monday.
The Senate today rejects a proposed transportation funding plan backed by the House. Lawmakers Valerie Edwards now joins us live from the Capitol with the latest on that. Valerie.
In Nwandi, the Senate's position was not unexpected. Earlier this week, the House added its twist to the Senate's proposed transportation T-SPLOST funding plan, and thus we have a chasm. Senator Jeff Mullis explains where the two sides are.
The House is wanting a statewide funding mechanism, and the Senate is wanting a regional funding mechanism. The key is finding that middle ground in between, and I really believe that we can do that. That's the way it works here. They offer a plan, we offer a plan. It's kind of like buying and selling a house. That's their first offer officially, and we'll come with a counter offer soon, hopefully. Again, as I said earlier, transportation is such an important issue for Georgia, and the discussions are real, and hopefully we can come to some consensus soon.
HB 277 now heads to a joint conference committee. And finally, tomorrow hearings continue on the proposed bill to restructure the DOT. Reporting live, I'm Valerie Edwards for Lawmakers.
A bill addressing the disposition of bodies after death passed the Senate today, but did include a Senate substitute that addresses where crematories can be established. This substitution was HB 68 in reaction to a Snellville crematorium located within 250 feet of a residential community. Senator Don Balfour answers a question from Senator Bill Heath about this measure.
Most crematoriums are in funeral homes, and if they are, there's no issue at all, none whatsoever. If you have a standalone crematorium, and in the situation in Snellville, we're talking about a 1,400 square foot home where the furnace is in the garage, which means when the hearse comes around, they got to pull the body out in plain view of 3 or 4 houses' backyards. Now, tell me what the value of those homes are when you put a crematorium there.
HB 68 passed by substitute and now goes back to the House. The Senate today also passed HB 195. This allows an electric membership corporation member to serve on a jury involving a case dealing with the EMC. However, a judge will have the option of disqualifying that person. Senate Majority Whip Mitch Seabaugh explains.
There are people that live in rural Georgia that are precluded from serving on a jury. And in a matter that would come before the court that would involve the EMC, they would not be able to serve on a jury whatsoever. Well, they're having a problem being able to get people to serve on a jury. So if you have a situation like if someone stole some metal from an EMC, it'd be very hard to set a jury in that matter because everybody is a member of the co-op. So what this bill would do is basically would remove the automatic exclusion from them serving on the jury, but it does maintain a judge's ability to judge to make sure that there's not any prejudice or a bias.
And HB 195 ended up passing 49-0, received no changes in the Senate, and now goes to Governor Perdue.
Well, legislation that aims to reduce the incidence of sexual exploitation of minors in this state passed the House today. Lawmakers Minu Hosseini is live at the Capitol with that story. Minu.
In Nwandi, Senate Bill 69 expands the definition of sexual exploitation, and Representative Amy Carter took the well today to explain what the bill will do.
Senate Bill 69 simply expands the definition of mandatory child abuse reporting law, which allows mandatory reporters to report all children they believe are being commercially sexually exploited.
Currently, sexual exploitation is limited to conduct by a child's parent or caretaker, but SB 69 expands that to include any person who allows, permits, encourages, or requires a child to engage in prostitution or sexually explicit conduct for the purpose of producing a print or visual media depicting the child.
All it does is create a mechanism for a child who has been abused to be identified and reported so that the child can be protected and receive services. There are no changes in the law that create any liability.
Senate Bill 69 is the only one of 3 bills that Senator Renee Unterman and Senator Jack Murphy co-sponsored that has passed both the House and the Senate. Senate Bill 74 and Senate Bill 91, both dealing with sexual exploitation, didn't make it out of the Senate before crossover and are likely dead for the session. Reporting live, I'm Minu Hosseini for Lawmakers.
Thanks so much, Minu. Well, the House today agrees to allow food sales in MARTA stations, but before final passage of Senate Bill 89, an attempt to amend the bill to increase gun carry rights takes place. Representative Jill Chambers carried the measure in the House.
Senate Bill 89 is extremely simple. All it does is allow public transit stations to enter into public-private partnerships to maybe put in a Coke machine or sell some Starbucks coffee, so that way you can take a moment's break when you get off the train and have a beverage or a snack. That's all it does. It also says that it could be beverages in resealed bottles rather than just bottled water. So now you can have some Gatorade or some anything else with twist top.
It may have started out simply enough. But even House Speaker Glenn Richardson was surprised by Representative Sean Jurgensen's amendment that would have allowed guns to be carried at the state's airports. House Speaker Pro Tem Mark Burkhalter was one of the House leaders who rose to oppose the amendment.
This amendment will allow guns at our airport, and if you think that's good for this state, and if you think it's good
for the Atlanta airport, and you think it's good for all the privately owned airlines that fly in out of Atlanta airport, then you go ahead and vote for the amendment.
Now, the Jurgensen amendment was withdrawn. SB 89 passed 165-0 and now requires the governor's signature to become law.
And staying on that same subject, Senator Vincent Fort took a point of personal privilege this morning to express his concern for recent talks of restructuring the MARTA board, giving more power to the state. Fort adds that there have already been enough governance bills this year.
One of the buzzwords for this session is governance. I've heard a great deal about governance, and I've heard enough about governance. Governance of school boards, governance of DOT board, and now we're talking about governance of MARTA. There's a proposal being contemplated where MARTA would, the MARTA board would be transformed into 3 local members and 4 state members. And essentially what that would result in is a state takeover of MARTA.
In other news, the House today gave final passage to a bill that prohibits some companies that invest in the nation of Sudan from doing business with the state of Georgia. Representative Joe Wilkinson explained to Representative Clay Cox that Senate Bill 170 would be repealed if the genocide in the Darfur region of Sudan ended.
There is a trigger mechanism in there which would close out this bill, and I pray it is one day very, very soon.
Saying that the legislation puts Georgia on the right side of history, Representative Tyrone Brooks responded to Representative Tommy Benton, who wondered whether SB 170 meddles in the affairs of another country.
I don't see it that way at all, and I think if we are committing genocide, if we are raping women, if we are chopping off the arms of babies, if we are burning down villages and communities, I would think that, yes, there would be some nations and communities that would say, we don't want to touch Georgia. But obviously, we're not at that point, and we are a different state. We've come a long, long ways, but we still have a distance to go. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to yield the well. Let's give Senate Bill 170 a favorable vote. Let's give it a unanimous vote to send a strong message to the government of the Sudan. Thank you very much.
And the House approved the measure 160-0. SB 170 now goes to the governor's desk.
Legislation that changes the definition of child molestation to include the internet unanimously passed the Senate today by committee substitute. Lawmakers Tiana Fernandez is live with more. Tiana.
Thank you, David. Currently, child molestation laws do not include electronic devices such as webcams, live streaming video found online. With the internet being a main source of finding information these days, Representative Matt Ramsey, sponsor of House Bill 123, felt something needed to change.
We have a law that's not keeping up with ever-changing technology. The internet has become the Wild West for sexual predators. It's created all new opportunities to prey on our children. This bill will certainly help give prosecutors an additional tool in the toolbox to go after those folks that would prey on our children.
And according to Representative Ramsey, there have been several child molestation cases that have fallen through due to the lack of legislation to include the internet. When Senator Ronnie Chance presented House Bill 123 in the Senate this afternoon, he explained that he became associated with the bill after hearing the results of a child molestation case in his local area.
Unfortunately, one of the cases has been overturned because the code did not specify that we could use online or webcams in the definition of child molestation.
And Senator Chance had no trouble passing this bill in the Senate, but since there were a few changes made to the language in the Senate Judiciary Committee, it will now move back to the House. Reporting live, I'm Tiana Fernandez for Lawmakers.
Thanks so much, Tiana. Well, from tobacco products to lead-based paint, public nuisance laws have been used to sue entire industries, but a bill that passed the House today would limit those kinds of liability lawsuits to only the specific manufacturer of the defective or harmful product. Bill sponsor Senator John Wiles explains.
Senate Bill 213 provides that if you are sued for causing harm, you have to be actually responsible as opposed to being part of the industry that created the product. A good example would have been a lead paint suit. You would have to prove that the lead paint that was painted on the walls of your house that caused the harm was made by the company that was being sued. Actually, there are several states that are using this. In fact, California is suing auto manufacturers based on damage and causing global warming based on the amount of cars they sell in the state, as opposed to showing that the cars they sell are in fact polluting.
Senate Bill 213 passed overwhelmingly in the House today, and it passed the Senate earlier this month. It now has to go to the governor. Well, a measure that the governor says will reduce frivolous lawsuits in the state is set to be considered by the House. Senator Bill Cowsert explains Senate Bill 108. It institutes a loser pays system for the early parts of a trial, and that would make would-be plaintiffs think twice, he says.
Current state of the law is you would have to pay thousands of dollars to attorneys just to prove that a case wasn't valid, or to go through producing documents and having your officers of the corporation give depositions, wasting their time and attorney's fees, even for a groundless lawsuit. So this will protect those people from having to run up these defense costs on groundless cases.
SB 180 was approved by House rules this morning and should be on the House floor early next week. We'd like to invite you to check out GPB's online resources at gpb.org/lawmakers. Find the latest from GPB's radio news team and watch Lawmakers online. All that and more at gpb.org/lawmakers. Well, continuing now, our weekly legislative roundup with Tom Crawford of CapitalImpact.com began today with a look at the statewide transportation plan. Are we in for a repeat of last session when the House and Senate could not reach a compromise on sine die?
The Senate and the House are still at odds over what's the best approach, a statewide sales tax or a regional sales tax imposed by groups of counties to raise money for highway projects. So they used some parliamentary procedures in the Senate today to basically throw the whole thing into a conference committee where you'll have 3 House members and 3 senators who will hopefully be negotiating next week in an attempt to try to get this issue resolved. If they're not able to reach agreement, of course, then we could see the session end for the second year in a row with the House and Senate bickering over what to do about traffic congestion.
And then beyond that T-SPLOS, you also have the governor stating that unless the Department of Transportation is reorganized and there's a new way of governing things, he isn't going to approve any measure that comes out anyway.
He has said that, and the House, I think, is still grappling with what they call the DOT governance issue, which is basically doing away or de-emphasizing the role of the current State Transportation Board and creating another authority that would make the big decisions on where to build highways and where to raise money for them. I'm not sure that's going to get out. That's one that there's also a lot of disagreement on, but the House probably will give it at least one vote before they get out of here next week.
It looks like the governor's being pretty ambitious as well, seeking to restructure the Department of Human Resources, Georgia's largest state agency.
He's had better luck with that. The House and the Senate have both agreed to differing versions of bills that break up DHR as we now know it and move some agencies around, and you wind up with 3 departments where you only had 2 before. Again, slightly different versions out of the House and Senate, but that looks like something they can work out a compromise on before the end of the session.
And they went ahead and sent HB 228 to conference committee today.
They did.
You know, the governor did have success with that super speeder legislation. Again, a couple of years in the making, but some success there.
That's right. The final version of the super speeder bill passed the House yesterday. It's going to the governor. Of course, he will sign it. It does a lot of things, but the simplest way to describe it is that you'll pay a higher fine, probably $200, if you get caught speeding more than 15 miles above the limit on 2-lane or 4-lane highways. The hope here is that it will raise money for trauma care in the state, maybe $23 million a year, I've heard is the estimate. That's not nearly enough to take care of the trauma needs, but it's a good start. So there's some good news probably on that front.
You know, obviously the overriding message of this session has been kind of how to deal with the economy. A couple of tax measures coming through both the House and Senate.
There are lots of bills coming through this session that provide tax cuts to one group of folks or another. The Senate passed one yesterday that's a package of tax breaks, including for businesses. Tax breaks that include eliminating the inventory tax and eliminating the corporate income tax. The House will have to agree to that because that wasn't something they put in the bill. The Senate passed another bill today that provides a temporary tax credit for folks who buy homes. The hope there is to try to kickstart the real estate industrial section again. That one, I think, has a financial impact of about $166 million, so that's a pretty substantial tax break as well, and I'm sure we will see some more before the session ends.
The final days, apparently, of the session as they're winding down, we are scheduled to sine die by next week, but there's some talk under the Gold Dome that might not take place.
I've heard continuing speculation that they may not be able to end it next Friday, which is what they now have that on their calendar. The Senate is not going to finally approve the state budget until Wednesday. That would leave them only 48 hours to work out all the differences between the House and Senate version, and that's a process that could take as long as 2 weeks. So there is talk that they may push day 40, the last day of the session, back by a week or two to give the negotiators time to work out the differences in the state budget. However, nothing official has been done yet, and it would require an affirmative vote in both the House and the Senate to change the calendar at this late date.
All right, well, we will have to stay tuned and see how that works. Tom, we always appreciate you joining us here on Lawmakers.
Always happy to be here.
A bill that would allow parents to send their children to any public school provided there is adequate space at that school takes another step towards becoming law. Lawmakers Brittany Evans has the details.
The Senate Education and Youth Committee passed HB 251 by substitute this morning. The bill would allow students to attend schools within their district and in other districts with the approval of the Receiving Schools Board. Committee Chair Dan Weber explained how it would work.
Most systems already allow transfer of students within a district from one school to another, and this legislation will encourage that to occur more. Under this legislation, if a student from District A were to go to District B, a neighboring district, the money would follow the child, meaning both the state money and the local money from District A would follow into District B.
Senator Vincent Fort voted against the bill. He says a transportation provision is needed.
If a student cannot get transportation, pay for transportation to that school they want to go to, it's really no choice at all. If we're going to have choice about public schools, if we're going to have choice, let's have real choice. Let's not do choice light, and that's what this is.
Bill sponsor Representative Alicia Morgan says the state's budget situation would not allow a transportation measure.
What I decided ultimately was to not require transportation, because I think for those students and those parents who are able to provide transportation and want to exercise their school choice, we should not prohibit them if they are able to provide that transportation.
HB 251 passed by committee substitute by a vote of 5-1. Now that bill moves on to Senate rules. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Brittany Evans.
And just as a reminder, next week is expected to be the final week of the legislature's 40-day session. For more information on that schedule, we encourage you to visit our website at gpb.org/lawmakers. We will continue to bring you all the latest Capitol news on legislative days. And because the General Assembly is in recess tomorrow, Lawmakers returns on Monday, March 30th at 7 p.m. If you have missed any part of this Lawmakers broadcast, tune in tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. when Lawmakers repeats here on GPB television. You can also see this episode of Lawmakers at 7 a.m. on GPB Knowledge. You can also keep up with all of the action under the Gold Dome daily on your local GPB radio station during Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and Georgia Gazette. Well, coming up on GPB television, This Old House, that is next here on GPB.
And that's our broadcast for this, the 37th legislative day of the 2009 session of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Nwandi Lawson.
And I'm David Zelski. Join us Monday night at 7 p.m. for Lawmakers. Have a great weekend.
Good night.
This has been a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.